British Labour voters are abandoning Keir Starmer. Just 2 years after winning a landslide and forming government, the Labour Party has been hit with one of its worst ever defeats. We don't know yet if the 2026 local elections will be the end of the Prime Minister's career, but the results did finally confirm what the polls have been hinting at for months. The two-party system is over in Britain, and the coalition of voters that brought Labour to power is falling apart. Labour have lost ground in their English heartlands and recorded their worst ever results in elections to the Scottish and Welsh parliaments. The biggest winners are Nigel Farage's Reform UK, who are stitching together a new coalition by flipping Labour's industrial strongholds and combining them with former Conservative territory. That could be enough to make right-wing populist Reform the first new party to win a UK general election in over 100 years. But the real threat to Labour may actually be from the left, where voters are splintering in different directions across the UK, from the Greens in England to pro-independence parties in Wales and Scotland. And although the results are a victory for Reform and a disaster for Labour, those smaller parties may have figured out how progressives can keep Nigel Farage out of power. This is the story of the collapse of Labour and how the scramble for their former voters is changing the face of British politics. These are the results of the 2024 UK general election, when Keir Starmer led the Labour Party to its third biggest majority ever. But the map doesn't really show the whole picture, because Labour only got 34% of the vote, the lowest vote share for a majority government in modern history. And it's all thanks to the collapse of the Conservative Party and the rise of Reform. About a quarter of traditional Conservative voters switched to Reform in the last election, splitting the right-wing vote and even helping Reform beat the Tories in some parts of the country. At the same time, progressives voted strategically for Labour or the Liberal Democrats, depending on who was most likely to win, allowing both those parties to make huge gains without significantly increasing their vote share. 2024 became the Conservatives' worst ever defeat, and it was much more a rejection of 14 years of Tory government, rather than an embrace of Keir Starmer. Labour came into government with a huge majority, but also a healthy dose of public skepticism. And in hindsight, it seems they were right to be skeptical. So far, Keir Starmer's government has been defined by scandals, unpopular policies, and constant flip-flopping. Many voters have begun to see Labour as a party with no real principles. In the industrial north of England, working-class Labour voters began to see Nigel Farage, once the leader of the Brexit movement, as the only real agent of change. Those trends became impossible to ignore after a 2025 by-election where Reform narrowly flipped a Labour stronghold just outside Liverpool. That was the first real proof that Starmer was losing the white working class to the populist right, just like what we've seen across Europe and the United States. Labour's response was to adopt some right-leaning policies on things like immigration, but that just cemented their image as a cynical party that stood for nothing. Rather than bring anyone back to Labour, the shift right was the final straw for progressives, who began abandoning the party as well. The Greens, now led by left-wing populist Zach Polanski, surged in the polls and flipped a Labour stronghold in Greater Manchester, marking Starmer's second by-election loss in the north. And that's how a deeply wounded Labour Party limped into the 2026 local elections. Older white working class Labour voters were shifting to Reform, while younger urban and multicultural voters were shifting to the Greens. That put their two biggest stronghold regions, urban London and the industrial north, into jeopardy. Without those areas, Labour would never be able to form government. Here's a map of the 32 councils up for election in the major metro areas of the English North and Midlands, part of what's called the Red Wall. These are solid Labour areas, but most of them voted for Brexit, and Reform largely finished second here in the last general election. Labour went into these local elections with outright majorities on 22 of these councils. They lost their majorities on 12 of them. And it's actually even worse than it looks, because many of those councils only had partial elections. If you just look at the seats contested this year, Reform won the most seats in 22 of these elections. Reform may only have 3 MPs along the Red Wall right now, but these local elections give them a pretty good claim to be the representatives of industrial England. Clearly, Labour isn't doing good enough. In a symbolic moment, Reform even won a slim plurality in Birmingham, the single biggest council area in England and the so-called first manufacturing town in the world. Now, Reform won't actually govern in Birmingham because the progressive parties combined have far more seats. The Greens, for their part, came a close second by winning in Birmingham's multicultural southeast, where Starmer's pro-Israel foreign policy tanked the Labour Party. They also won the most seats in Manchester, where they now have an MP. But their biggest success came in the 32 boroughs of London, Labour's other electoral stronghold. Labour had majorities on 21 borough councils going into this election, and just like the Red Wall, they lost control of 12 of them. The Greens didn't do as well in London as Reform did in the north, but they're now the biggest party in 5 borough councils, and they're second place to Labour in a few others. They've proven that they can win in urbanized city centres, but in order to replace Labour, as Zach Polanski wants to do, they'll need to go toe-to-toe with Reform in Labour's former industrial heartlands. If they want to know how to do it, they should look to the pivotal election that just happened next door in Wales. Although England has the most MPs at risk for Labour, the election for the Senedd Cymru, the Welsh Parliament, might be their biggest moral defeat of the night. Labour have won every countrywide election in Wales since 1922, and they've won every Senedd election ever contested, until now. In 2026, Labour lost more than 2/3 of their seats and dropped to a distant 3rd place. Replacing them as the largest party is not Reform, it's Plaid Cymru, the centre-left pro-independence party of Wales. Unlike the Greens in England, Plaid mostly managed to beat Reform in South Wales, an industrialised region similar to the English Red Wall. How do they do it? Is South Wales turning separatist? Well, no. Welsh independence polls quite low, and its supporters are concentrated in the rural, Welsh-speaking areas that make up Plaid's electoral base. In fact, Plaid Cymru spent very little time talking about independence during this campaign, and it's unlikely that they'd pursue it while in government, at least not yet. But in a strange way that actually kind of makes sense, their separatist beliefs give them some independence from the unpopular UK parties. It means Welsh voters have another anti-establishment choice beyond just Reform, one that can actually win. If they're given the option, many working-class Labour supporters would rather vote for an established, viable left populist party over a right populist one. Combined with their Welsh-speaking base, Plaid now have a coalition of urban, rural, and industrial voters who are both pro and anti-independence, but who can all agree that they dislike the establishment parties in Westminster. That is a difficult coalition to beat, but maybe we should have seen this coming, because a similar coalition was already built in Scotland over a decade ago. The urban and industrial Scottish Central Belt, which includes both Glasgow and Edinburgh, was a Labour heartland for generations. That's until they lost it completely in the 2015 general election to the pro-independence Scottish National Party. The SNP was already pretty popular by then, governing Scotland since 2007 and leading a failed independence referendum in 2014. And even though voters opted to stay in the UK, the referendum consolidated the pro-independence vote behind the SNP. But by the time Starmer was elected, the SNP had governed for 17 years straight, and it looked vulnerable. Like other progressives, Scottish voters coalesced behind Starmer and delivered the Central Belt back to Labour. For just a moment, there was a chance that Labour could beat the SNP and win back control of the Scottish government. Of course, that chance didn't last very long, and Labour's polling dropped as quickly as Reform surged in the aftermath of the Starmer victory. In a political Hail Mary, Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar became one of the first high-profile Labour politicians to call for Starmer to step down. But it didn't work, and it didn't really help. Reform and Labour tied for second in the 2026 Scottish Parliament election, and neither made a dent in the Central Belt. It turns out a lot of Scottish voters have already chosen their anti-establishment cause, independence. Reform is competing at a disadvantage in Scotland because they're seen as a British nationalist party. The vast majority of pro-independence Scottish voters are inaccessible to Reform, so they have to fight over the anti-independence vote with at least 3 other parties. Despite their success with the white working class in England and also Wales, they could not break through the barrier of Scottish nationalism. Reform may have made gains in this election, but they're no closer than Labour to contending for government in Scotland. And no matter what could have happened during these elections, the Senedd and the Scottish Parliament have a kind of failsafe that is missing from the English local councils and from Westminster: proportional representation. Vote splitting is less of a problem in Wales and Scotland, and it's very difficult to win a majority of seats without something close to a majority of the votes. The Welsh and Scottish systems give voters more freedom to vote for smaller parties without the risk of handing a majority to a party they dislike. Meanwhile, in England, Reform won a lot of council seats because of vote splitting on the left. In Westminster, Starmer himself owes his majority to the lack of proportionality in general elections. And now that the progressive vote is fracturing, Farage could also depend on vote splits to secure his own majority next time. But from the ashes of Labour, the 2026 local elections may have actually revealed a way for progressives to win together. Plaid and the SNP have proven that left populist movements can compete with Reform if people think they have a chance to win. And both those parties are polling with big enough leads right now to prevent vote splitting in their countries at a general election. Now it's up to another party, maybe Labour but probably the Greens, to be the left populist voice in England. And although they don't have a claim to northern identity the way Plaid and the SNP do for Wales and Scotland, continued Green electoral success, and bad governance by Reform, could go a long way in convincing former Labour voters that there is a genuine option for change on the left. Reform is still the party to beat, and Nigel Farage will basically be the Prime Minister in waiting until polls say otherwise. But the 2026 local elections may have shown British progressives a way out of the wilderness after the fall of Labour. Have your say in the comments. What do you think happens to Keir Starmer and the Labour Party in the aftermath of this election? Can Labour recover? Can the Greens replace them? Or will Nigel Farage finally lead his party to victory? Like and subscribe if you found this video interesting or informative. Thanks very much to my YouTube members for your support. It means a lot and it really helps with making these videos a reality. You can become a member if you'd like to support me more, and if you want maps for the elections I don't make videos about. And if you can, please follow me on Twitter or Blue Sky at the handles in the video or the links in my description. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.